Well, thanks for joining us today. I'm Senator Smith from the 31st Senate District in West Central Wisconsin. I had the honor to serve on the Governor's Task Force for Student Debt this past summer, and we did a lot in a short time, I gotta admit. And with the pandemic, we were limited in time, or getting started, I should say. And once we got started, though, we had a tremendous participation, and I wanted to introduce three important figures from that task force, and we're going to have a conversation about what the recommendations were. So let's start with Secretary Kathy Blumenfeld. You want to tell us a little bit about yourself?
Thank you, Senator Smith. I'm Kathy Blumenfeld. I head up the Department of Financial Institutions, and the governor asked me to chair the task force on student debt. And as a mother of 3 adult children, I'm acutely aware of what it takes to put 3 children through college. And I also look at all of my children's friends and see the struggles that they have had with student debt, and how many times they've had to put their life that they dreamed of on hold due to some of the burdens that student debt has provided. And in my role traveling around the state, I also see the hardships and the disproportionate impact that student debt has on our more vulnerable communities. So this is a topic near and dear to my heart. It's very important to Governor Evers, and we tried to amass the best and the brightest people all around the state from all different disciplines to help us solve and provide some recommendations on how we can better the state of Wisconsin in the world of student debt. So thank you for having us here today.
Oh, thank you. And Lara Sutherlin, you want to tell us a little bit about yourself and what brought you to the task force?
Sure, I'd be happy to. Thanks for having me, Senator Smith. And I served on the task force. I was appointed by the governor, and really enjoyed working with Kathy and her team. I am the division administrator at the Division of Trade and Consumer Protection at DATCP. And I've been there for a couple years. Prior to that, I was an assistant attorney general in the Consumer Protection Unit. And in both of those places, I've worked on student loan debt from a consumer protection angle. And unfortunately, as we know, when you see this amount of debt out there, you're going to see a lot of predatory behavior from scam artists, but also just general deception in that space. And so it can cost student loan borrowers even more money. You know, we're looking at a $1.7 trillion worth of debt right now, and then you compound that with some of the predatory actions in the consumer protection space. It can really compound a really already terrible problem. So I was working on that as an AAG, and now I'm working on that as a division administrator, and was really excited to be part of the task force to try to come up with some solutions to protect borrowers and give them the information and the rights they need in trying to figure out how to get this debt off their back.
Well, thanks for being with us, Lara. And Connie Hutchison, I know that you have a very important role among students and student loans. So could you tell us about that?
Yes, thank you, Senator Smith, and thank you for inviting me to join this this webinar or taping. I am the Executive Secretary of the Higher Educational Aids Board. I am appointed by Governor Evers, and I also was appointed by Governor Doyle to do this job when he was in office. I am really, I came to understand the true impact of the debt that students have when I was listening to State Treasurer Godlewski when she was on the campaign trail. And she was the one that basically brought this to the public's attention. And one of the things that really struck me, well, there were 2 things about the comments that she made, were that student debt just doesn't affect students. It affects communities all over our state, because people who have major debt aren't able to purchase a home. They're not able to purchase a new car. Their purchasing power is really diminished, and unless they get a job that can really help them cover that debt, a lot of people get out of college and don't get the job they thought they were going to get. So that was one thing. I had never thought of the impact that student debt has on the state in general. And then the other thing that I learned while serving on the task force was that there are schools out there that are the for-profit schools, not all of them, but they really target veterans of our military veterans. And a lot of times those people go into those schools, they're not able to finish a degree for whatever reason. The tuition is extremely high. In a lot of cases, the school goes out of business. So we have a lot of our veterans, our military veterans, who have a lot of student debt based on that. And so that was another thing that really struck me about student debt, that it affects us, our communities, it affects families. Now, I don't believe that you should be able to get out of college and then all your debt is gone. I mean, that's not what the task force was. That is not the direction that Secretary Blumenfeld had when she started the task force. She didn't say, all right, let's all figure out how we can get rid of everybody's debt immediately. But we were trying to find solutions under her guidance of how we could help people manage their debt more successfully and get the information that they need, and help those who are starting college or in higher education, help them not get into as bad of a situation, help them navigate and find out what this really means to them before they get into too much debt. So those are the places where I'm coming from.
Yeah, well, thanks, Connie. You know, and boy, you're right. This is really good for you to point out the under the radar piece of that with veterans, that I think most people are not aware of what happens when people are not necessarily know what they're getting into, right? And that happens, and they are an easy target because people see this money that the government is offering for veterans to get an education, and they take advantage of that. You know, a lot of what I was going to ask, you've all touched on already, and I was going to, but maybe it's a good segue. At least, Kathy, you want to add a little bit more about the tour you took last summer with Treasurer Godlewski and Connie and others. I think you went to La Crosse, Milwaukee, Wausau, Green Bay, and heard quite a bit before before creating this task force. What did you hear that really spurred you to realize we needed to do something right now?
We just heard heartbreaking story after heartbreaking story of people of all ages and all walks of life that have been saddled with student debt. Many on the front end didn't really understand what they were taking on going into it. So that's where a big focus came out of in our task force on financial literacy and education up front. We know in Wisconsin that 53% of Wisconsinites live paycheck to paycheck. And we heard many stories of people that had to drop out of their higher education because of an illness, or because a car broke down, or because they had some interruption in their life where they didn't have enough money to get through that situation. And so we heard from a lot of borrowers, and actually the data that we heard during the task force really supported this, but many people with maybe $10,000 worth of debt that just are in a place where they can't pay that down. And oftentimes they're in forbearance, or they've defaulted on that loan, and those balances continue to grow. And they have nothing to show for it. They have no degree, they have no job that's commensurate with the loan that they took out. We also heard a very multi-generational effect on these loans. So we heard from parents that had their own debt that were trying to help their kids now go to school and maybe taking out a Parent Plus loan. We actually heard from grandparents, and we heard from more than a handful of people that really told us that they would die before their debt was ever paid off. And that was truly, truly heartbreaking to see. We heard from people in the that were taken advantage of in the for-profit industry, as Connie talked about a little bit before, veterans, and really the disparate impact that people feel, communities of color, veterans, women. It was just one story after another. And I think we all, at the end of each of the meetings, we all felt overwhelmed by the burden and the hardship that people were feeling.
Yeah, and I would just touch on the I think all the things that we learned from the task force and came back with recommendations worked hand in hand. And you think when you think about just financial literacy, which goes beyond just getting a student loan, it goes just into life in general. And I think a lot of young people who come out of whether high school or college are faced with things they never really understood or expected, that because we haven't trained them to understand their own financial place in life. So Lara, you want to talk more about like the consumer protection side of it, which again I think goes hand in hand, and I was on that task or on that group with you, and we came back with recommendations about an ombudsman and more. So would you like to talk more about that?
Yeah, I'd love to, Senator. And that's right. The ombudsman and the borrower bill of rights was one of the recommendations that came out of the consumer protection work group. And a borrower bill of rights is exactly what it sounds like. It is a delineation of rights and responsibilities that a borrower has in a document. That's a right, it can be a regulation, but it allows people to understand what their rights are and ways in which they can enforce it. And it really speaks to what we were talking about. There's so much misinformation out there, or inconsistent information. There's predation after veterans, as Connie and you both mentioned. That's because of the GI Bill. There's something about that bill that makes them more a target of the proprietary schools, of the for-profit schools. So you often see the for-profit schools targeting those veterans. So having a borrower bill of rights, a concrete document that allows people to understand their rights, and then an ombudsman with that, that can enforce those rights, but also just allow them to understand and navigate the system, which is what an ombudsman's office could do, is a really excellent tool that many states have already utilized, and can do a lot of things. If people understand their rights when it comes to borrowing, it can work the whole spectrum of the process of borrowing, right? So your rights at the front end of when you're taking on the loans, the rights that you have while you have them during the repayment process. And if you are unfortunate enough to be in a school that closes, like many of these for-profit schools have done, your rights with relationship to that. So really, really important information that can help you not take out too much money, properly pay down your loans so it can bring down that debt load. And then if you are a victim of fraud or predatory conduct, you've got an office that can help you navigate that system and hopefully get your rights resolved. So really interesting recommendation that we're excited for the governor to take a look at.
Yeah, I compare a lot of the work we did to predatory loans, payday loans, all that everybody else has to deal with, and I think it's all connected. There is an industry out there that try to take advantage of people. So that brings me to I've had some contact with people who wonder about this loan forgiveness. What does that mean? And are we just thinking we're going to let people off the hook completely? And already you've touched on that, Connie. You want to talk more about what is actually out there already and what loan forgiveness actually means?
Well, loan forgiveness isn't just, oh, all right, you don't have to pay anymore. I mean, there's usually something that you have to do in order to get a loan forgiven. For example, the few pretty small programs that we have for loan forgiveness, like the minority teacher loan, you have to teach in a minority school district, and you get some of your loan forgiven each year. It's not like you're there for 3 days and your loan is gone. We are doing right now, there will soon be a rural health forgivable loan, where somebody who's in dentistry, psychiatry, or medicine, if they get that loan and they work in a designated rural health area, there's so many places where people in rural areas have no access to dentists, or other health professionals, unless they drive hours and hours to get somewhere, have an appointment. So we'll have a loan that will, if they work there, after for each year they work there, part of their loan is forgiven. So it's not like, oh, we're going to work in a health area and they tell us that and then we forgive their loan. They have to provide proof of all of the things that they do to get their loans forgiven. So, when we talk about forgivable loans, there still has to be accountability. People still have to understand that they took out this loan and they need to do something to help pay that off. We just don't have a society, or even it wouldn't be right to just say, okay, you have loans, we're just going to forgive them because you didn't know what you were doing. So when we talk about forgivable loans, there are some very serious steps that have to be taken and proof of those steps.
And with it, and in theory, you hope that people establish themselves in that community and they don't want to leave after their time that they have spent there anyway. So it should work, right? It should work. Hopefully
it should work. I don't know if any of you remember the show Northern Exposure, but
I do.
I loved that show. But he ended up in Alaska to get his loans paid off.
Yeah.
Oh, I forgot about that.
Rural Wisconsin
that was a great
could
show.
use some of those.
It's a win-win. It becomes a win-win for the state and for the person.
It does.
Very
Kathy.
good.
Yeah. And speaking of win-wins, and wrap it up here somewhat, Kathy, do you want to talk about what the next steps are to fix student debt crisis in Wisconsin, and then where can Wisconsinites learn more about the recommendations from the task force?
Sure. Well, I will tell you where to find the 117-page study that we produced from our task force. It's at LookForwardWI.gov, and you'll find the full, all the information that we used and data for the task force, as well as the final report right on that website, LookForwardWI.gov. And in terms of next steps, we had considered 37 different proposals. We winnowed those down to 8 that we have now sent along to Governor Evers for his consideration. And we did power through our task force in, I think, record time, so that we would be able to give the governor those recommendations prior to his submission of the next biennial budget. So they're working on that right now. The governor and his team are going through the full report right now. We're meeting with them next week to talk through and answer questions about the different proposals so that they can determine which ones and how they want to include those in the budget. We also have all of the recommendations that were submitted in this body of knowledge, I'll call it, or a toolkit, if you will. And having Senator Smith as part of our task force was awesome, as well as Representative Ballwig and Representative Hesselbein, because we know that many of them will require legislation in order to move them forward. So we'll be working with the legislators on this committee to try and put together a strategy for making some of those happen, and also even private employers and anyone really that wants to dig in and help with this crisis in Wisconsin can pick up the report and help with advocacy, contacting your legislators, contacting the governor, letting everyone know which ones that you feel strongly about supporting. We'd love to hear that. And if you have concerns, we'd love to hear that as well. So the next month or so, month to 2 months, we'll be working hard on the governor's budget and putting proposals forward to try and move this hopefully across the finish line. We joked, since we had to do this entire task force virtually, we didn't really get to have a cake at the end or celebrate in the traditional way a task force does with closure. So we decided that we'd postpone that celebration until we actually got things moving and through the legislature. So we're really looking forward to that day. There's a lot of great ideas.
So am I, Kathy. I'm always up for cake. And I,
Who
Me
is it,
too.
right?
that'd be great. Yeah.
And can I
Well,
just say that I want to congratulate Secretary Blumenfeld and her team, her staff at DFI, because doing this virtually was a big lift. The task force was a big lift anyway. And I thought they really did a tremendous job. So congratulations on that. And thank you for
Thank
all your
you.
work on that. And thanks your team. Thank your team. It went really very, very well.
Well, thank you. We
I think
couldn't
we
have
could
done it
all
without you,
agree on
Connie
that.
or Lara.
Thanks.
Go ahead.
Yeah. And Lara,
Oh,
want to
yes.
tell us one last thing, one last word, DATCP's role and consumer protection's role in this in the future?
Oh, well,
How do you see that laying out?
how do we see it playing out? It's a great question. The Borrower Bill of Rights is something that I think it would be near and dear to consumer protection's heart, because it really lays out what consumers and borrowers are entitled to. So that would be something, whether we would be able to enforce it if the legislation were ever passed, we would certainly be informed about it and be using that as a tool in our quiver, or a tool in our tool chest, I should say, to make sure borrowers are protected when they're out there. So lots of great information. Also, the recommendation with respect to proprietary schools, for-profit schools have had a significant negative impact in some spaces in Wisconsin. So seeing some robust regulations or standards placed on those schools would be something great for consumer protection and for the residents and borrowers of Wisconsin. And so, yeah, it's been a really excellent task force. There's some exciting ideas that can be fleshed out and taken on to the next step. And so we're looking forward to seeing that. And I congratulate Secretary Blumenfeld on her efforts. This is an important issue. It affects consumers, it affects residents, it affects our economy, and it really is important that we take it seriously. And I'm glad that she was ahead of it and took it to the governor. Hopefully we'll see where it goes.
Okay.
And can
Yeah,
I just,
you're
I
right.
just want to
Great.
I want to make one clarification, because we have a lot of private, not-for-profit colleges and universities in Wisconsin that are wonderful. And sometimes people get them mixed up with proprietary schools. So I just want to make sure that people understand that the many private, not-for-profit colleges that we have are great. They take good care of their students, as well as do the schools for the UW system and for the technical college system. So there's a big difference
Connie,
between for-profit proprietary schools and the not-for-profit.
thank you for making that distinction, Connie. I think that is important, and people should be aware of that. Good for you. Thank you. Thanks
Thank
for
you.
everyone being here.
Thank
And
you.
good work, everybody. Hopefully we will get something through next session.
That'd be
Have a
great.
good day.
Congratulations.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.